name is Marcia Getting, and I'm the Family Economic Specialist for MSU Extension. And I'm just delighted that we've had so many of you register. And I want to introduce you to the team that we have presenting this program for the next 4 sessions. Now, who you heard from first was Emily Stanley. She is our MSU Extension agent in Petroleum and Fergus County. I call her my tech buddy because she's the one that figures out how to make WebEx work for the rest of us. New to our team is Kevin Brown, and Kevin is Associate Vice President of Development for our MSU Alumni Foundation. And he's joining us to share some things from the perspective of that particular organization. And then we have the shy one in our group, and that's Carrie. Carrie is our webinar assistant. She's the one that put together all those, the website and all the things that are there, the resources, and does a great job in being a full partner for our team for Thoughtful Thursdays. So we had, wow, 162 Montanans sign up, and Carrie put together this really neat not calendar, but a map that shows where we have most of our participants. And you can see they're mostly in the West. And those of you out there in the East, you need to get some of your buddies enrolled in this or registered for our program. We would also like to welcome our out-of-staters. Welcome back to MSU. I suspect some of you are MSU graduates, and we're just delighted to have you join us. Now, if you've participated in any webinars over the past year, you know that sometimes they can get just a little boring, and I don't want ours to be boring. So what we've come up with are some participant engagement tools. And one of those is called polls. I would call it questions, but the whole idea is to get a sense of what you know, what you don't know. But we thought we'd also use it as a way to find out, how did you learn about today's program? Was it something the MSU Alumni Foundation sent you in an email? Was it, are you one of our Tuesday Tips participants? Or how about our Mont Guide Mondays participants? You know, pretty soon we're going to use up every day in the week. How about a news article in the paper? Did you hear from your county extension agent or other? And if you would please indicate what other method or how you found out in the chat room. And like Emily said, do not forget to click on submit. Okay? So give us your answers by clicking. Well, I'm getting to watch as some of these come in, and I can see that we have the MSU Alumni Foundation. We do have a few of our Tuesday Tips folks, and then we have folks that aren't answering. So if you can, we'd really encourage you to participate in our polls so that we know that you're out there and you're letting us know what you think and what you already know. So Emily, if we could bring those finalize. And we see that 23% heard from the Alumni Association or Foundation. So Kevin, your marketing really did work. Thank you. And then we've got, like I said, our Tuesday Tips. Okay, the second thing that we're going to do as far as engagement is to encourage you to use the chat panel. The idea of the chat panel is an opportunity for you to ask questions as we go along. And what Emily is going to do is watch the chat room, and when it has to do with the particular topic that we're on, she will say, yo, Marcia, we've got a question here, and maybe I need to clarify something that I made as clear as mud. So we are going to remain in the WebEx room for an extra 15 minutes after the program so that you would have a chance to listen to those questions and answers if you happen to be interested. Our third way of trying to keep your attention is wildflowers, or I should say, our wildflowers, maybe. But wildflowers are some, I'm waiting for summer when we have a chance to get out and see what they're doing. And what I discovered is I was feel like my presentations were getting a little on the dry side with estate planning. Been doing this for many, many years. And so I'm whining about that on the way home to Kansas to see my folks. And my hubby said, keep working on it, you'll think of something. Well, I was folding my wildflower cards because I make those to use as birthday gifts, and I had an idea. What if I use the wildflower names as reminders to help you remember some of the concepts that we're using in Thoughtful Thursdays? So we'll see if it works for you. This very first one, I should have waited and told you what it was, but it's a steer's head. See those two eyes? See the ears? Yeah, it's a steer's head. It's really a cute flower, and it's going to be growing in Yellowstone in the sandy areas come May. One of the first ones to come up after the snow. So I use the steer's head to indicate that I want to steer you towards an awareness, and not only I, but the rest of the team, about how you could avoid the cost of probate by using PODs and TODs on your financial accounts. I also then want to make sure that I steer you to an awareness of how a transfer on death deed could be used to avoid the cost of probate on your real property. Thank you, Montana legislature, for these two laws. Now, when I say avoid the fees on probate, what it is that I'm talking about? Well, you see, when we have probate, we have a personal representative on the estate, and they get paid a fee. And the attorney that handles the estate is a fee. Then there are court costs. Then there are copying fees. And so it turns out that they can sometimes be substantial. So here's an example of a grandma who had $250,000 in her estate. Well, when we looked at what she was going, or not she, but her estate was going to pay was $5,400 for the personal representative and $8,100 for the attorney, just to handle those assets. So what is it that grandma could have done had she known about it? Well, this happens to be a really neat flower. And I decided to use it on a card to send to somebody that was, it was my good friend's mom. She had cancer and it was really serious. And I thought, I've got to get around. I've got to send her a card and buck her up. And do you know what I sent to her? I'm still embarrassed about it. I sent her a mountain death canvas. I never send a card anymore without I am sure I know the name of the flower. But the mother was really nice. She said, Marcia, she wrote a letter and said, you know what? We lost 7 sheep in the Lima Mountains as a result of mountain death camas. The sheep were stupid enough to eat it. So anyway, that makes me think of pods. And so what is a pod? A pod is a payable on death designation. And you can do this on your financial accounts, your checking account, your savings accounts, any certificates of deposit that you have, and also United States savings bonds. By putting a POD on those, there is no probate. The ownership automatically goes to the POD beneficiary. And all that person will need is an affidavit of your death, which they can fill out, and a government issued photo ID, and they go to your friendly bank or credit union and say, hi, I'm John, and I have a CD that I'm the beneficiary on. Very, very easy. And you can do that yourself. You don't have to have an attorney do that. Just go to your financial institutions and say, I want to put or place a POD on my accounts. Now, the other thing about a POD is that you can POD to a charity or a nonprofit. You see, before we had to write a will if we wanted to leave something to those organizations. But now we could say, okay, my first POD will be my spouse. But if I don't have children, I'm just going to put a secondary POD, and maybe it's the Montana State University Alumni Foundation. And here's equal opportunity, folks. How about the School of Law at that other university? MSU Extension? Yay! Or how about the Montana 4-H Foundation? So they're just a few of the many nonprofits and charities that are out there that you could use a POD on. So my thoughtful Thursday tip from the Mountain Death Canvas is use PODs to control the distribution of your savings account, checking, CDs, and United States savings bonds. And what you do is you avoid those pesky fees upon your death. Now here is an albino fairy slipper. I don't know if any of you have ever seen one, but when I saw one, I got excited because this was the first albino that I had ever seen. And you see, this is what they normally look like. And either way, they're very beautiful. So of course, I decided I've got to work this into my presentation. So I decided to look at the albino family. And we have the husband and wife who had children, who grew up and they got married, and then they had children. So the grandparents are thrilled that they have kids. Now, mom is the one that survives. You see, we had a son pass away, we had a daughter pass away, and even the dad or the father. So here is mom passing away in 2010, and she put her POD on the checking and savings accounts, all the assets that they had, and she noticed in little bitty print, it said by right of representation. But she said, not going to worry about it. Well, she dies. And so what I want to know from you is I have a red lightning bolt on this grandchild D. And what I want you to tell me is what fraction, if any, would that grandchild receive of the $500,000 in assets that mom put the POD on? And there's several of those. So I'm going to give you a choice of what those responses might be. It could be nothing. It could be 1/6. How about 1/7 or 1/9? You tell me under right of representation what fraction grandchild D would receive. Okay. And for those of you that are just thinking, oh, I'm not going to bother with the POD, this is what Montana does if you die without a will. Your property is distributed by right of representation. Okay, so don't forget, hit that submit button when you have decided on your answer. Okay? Okay, Emily, are we getting lots of responses? Oh my goodness. I can look at this and I can see that some of you are just downright mean. 40, almost half of you, 42%, are saying that grandchild doesn't receive anything. And we've got some that said a 6, and we had all of 18% say a 9. Well, let's see what the right answer is. Guess what? 18% of you is all that got it right. So I'm glad I asked this question because you see that term right of representation is not something that we carry around in our brain. When the attorney first used that term with me, I just kind of looked at him like a deer with his eyes in the headlight. What does that mean? Well, take a look at this family. We have mom and dad, and they had 3 kids. So right of representation is going to be divided among those 3 children. But because it's representation, if we have one child predeceased the parents, then that child's share goes down to the grandchild. So that's why we've got this turquoise child here receiving all of a third. We've got the pink grandchildren they don't get anything. And they're saying, well, didn't grandma and grandpa like me too? I mean, they're upset, and they're kids. We're trying to tell them, well, that's the way law is. Well, come on, maybe that's not the way you want to have it. So this 1/9, you see, is a third of a third. So that's by right of representation. And that may be exactly the way you want it. But if that's not the way you want it, then you need to look into the different language and make sure that you know what is on that card that you signed. Now, it could have been, mom would have said, I leave these items POD equally to my children. Well, what happens then is we have one son well, what does he get? All, because the other two children are deceased. And what happens with the grandchildren? They don't get anything. Now, she could have said POD equally to my grandchildren, and then all of the grandchildren would have inherited, and they would have received 1/6 each. So my Thursday tip, Thoughtful Thursday, is that Montanans need an understanding of the difference between equally and right of representation when it's used in a POD. Okay? Now here we have a heart-leafed arnica, and I happen to have found these in the Deer Lodge National Forest. And I think what I'm going to do is look at heart-to-heart estate planning with Joe Hart and Brooke Hart, but I'm going to turn it over to Emily. Emily, why don't you tell us about Joe Hart using his PODs with a will?
Sure. Okay, so Joe has heartfelt intentions and he wants to designate his $100,000 COD or CD to his sweetheart Brooke. Can you go back, Marcia?
Sorry, I was trying to find my shut me off thing.
Can you go back
Okay,
more?
more.
Yep, okay. So Joe has listed or designated Brooke, his sweetheart, as his POD beneficiary on this $100,000 CD that he has. But then later he changes his mind and decides that he wants to leave that CD to his son. So what he does is write a will that says, I bequest my $100,000 CD to my son, Eric Hart. So then the question becomes, who is going to receive that $100,000? Will Brooke, the one who is listed on the POD beneficiary, or will Eric receive it because he was named as the recipient in the will that was written most recently? And feel free to answer. These aren't graded, so even if you're not sure, go ahead and take a guess. Lots of answers coming in, which is great.
Oh, that's good.
All right, let's take a look at what we have. Okay, so we had most people saying that Brooke was going to receive that $100,000 CD, but we had some folks say Eric too. So let's take a look at what the right answer is. The answer is Brooke. So the majority was right this time. Why is she going to receive this $100,000 CD even though Eric was named afterwards? The reason why is because she is listed as the beneficiary on the POD, and that form that you fill out at your financial institution is actually a contract, which has precedence over a will.
Well, what should Joe do then to change his beneficiaries?
Yeah, so what Joe needs to do if he really does want that CD to go to his son instead of his sweetheart is to go to the bank and fill out a new POD beneficiary designation form. So he can go in any time, talk to his bank, and just get a new form that overrides the previous one. So when we are in an audience, a live audience, we have people say this together. So Marcia's got a sing-along here that hopefully you can sit in front of your computer and say, You can't undo a POD with a will. Remember that. You can't undo a POD with a will. That's what we need to learn from the Hart family.
And Emily, sometimes I have to shout at them because they say it very low. You can't undo a POD with a will. And I really say, you can't undo a POD with a will. And I had a guy come up to me, well, before COVID, and this is exactly what he said. And I knew that he had been to one of my meetings. So that was kind of fun, I got to admit.
So just remember, have a heart, make sure that you're reviewing any beneficiary designations that you have on checking and savings accounts, CDs, savings, bonds. Make sure that that what you want to happen is what will happen.
And I might share that Montana institutions are very good about letting you do more than one POD beneficiary. But for United States savings bonds, just to give you an alert, they only let you do one. Yeah, only one. So if you've got 10 grandchildren, you've got to think about how you're going to be able to do that. Just a thought.
So, Kevin, let's take a look at Marcia. She has 4 grandnephews and wants to give them her mutual fund. Is she able to pass them her mutual fund without probate?
Thanks, Emily. Short answer is yes. And we're going to use the Meadow Death Canvas to learn about TODs. So a TOD is a transfer on death registration. You can place TODs on things like stocks, bonds, and of course, in Marcia's case, for her 4 grandnephews, it would be on her mutual funds. So she would name her 4 grandnephews on her mutual funds through a transfer on death registration. If she was so inclined, we know Marcia well. She has favorite charities as well. So, oh, excuse me, I skipped a slide. So that would transfer to those beneficiaries without probate, just like similar to a POD. And as I was saying, Marcia's charitably inclined. She's got some favorite charities she's passionate about. She could also name charity on those stock, bonds, and or mutual funds if she wanted to. So,
Yeah, and I might
ahead.
even decide to recognize, say, the Montana chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. And it's important for, if somebody's going to list their TODs, that they be specific, because we had an incident in another town unnamed where an individual left $1 million, yes, really $1 million, to let's say, big name that starts with an R. And what happened then is the national organization said, we're the ones that are supposed to have that. But everybody that was a member of that club knew that he wanted it to go to the Butte chapter. And so keep that in mind as you're doing your PODs and your TODs.
Yeah, that's a good point. We'll get to it a little later in the presentation, but it's always a good idea to talk to the charity as well about PODs and TODs. They like to know. They like to recognize and say thank you while we still can. But also in that case, to help clarify, is it the Butte chapter or is it national in that case? So a thoughtful Thursday tip from our Meadow Death Canvas, again, use TODs to, again, like PODs, control that distribution. Where do you want the stocks, bonds, mutual funds, etc., to go, or whom do you want to get them to go to, and also avoid those fees at death. So now that you know about PODs and TODs, will you place them on your financial accounts?
And just to remind
Hopefully,
people, don't forget to hit that submit button.
hopefully some of you already have PODs or TODs on some of your financial accounts.
Well, this is a great way for us to find that out. Okay, Emily, do we have some results that we can get excited about? What do we got there, Kevin?
Looks like we have, the good news is 55% say yes, they will, and 9% say they already have them. So we still have a few folks that aren't answering. So if you're having technical difficulties with the poll, remember some of Emily's instructions either on your phone or your computer. So we'd love your responses. So that's great. Hopefully looks like most of you plan to use PODs and TODs in the near future.
Okay, and remember, guys, you've made a commitment. You said now that you know about it, you're going to do it, and it's really very simple. Like Emily says, go down there and they'll do it for you.
So this is a beautiful flower. It's the Explorer's Gentian. So, Marcia, do you want to tell us how we could explore TO or TODs with two Ds?
Yeah, isn't that interesting? We got a Todd and a Todd, but this particular one is I want to explore a transfer on death deed. This is a somewhat new law that we have in Montana, and it is a way that you can convey your real property to as many designated beneficiaries as you want, and there's no probate. Now just think of that. If you had a $6,000 trailer or a $600,000 home or $6 million in land, you can transfer it without probate. And our transfer on death deed became effective 2 years ago, October 1st, 2019. Now, some of you may have already filed a beneficiary deed, and you do not need to refile. Once you've done that, you're fine. You were grandfathered in. But if you go, like one gentleman that called me, he said he had a beneficiary deed. It was all set to go. He goes to the clerk and recorder, and they say, no, you have to have a transfer on death deed. And we have an example of the form because when the legislature passes something that's statutory, in other words, they put it in the law, then extension can provide that for folks, and we're happy to do so. But let's take a look at some of the rights that your designated beneficiary has. Remember, they do not own it until you are gone. So they can't use your home as collateral for a loan. They can't sell it out from under you. They just can't do anything like that. Creditors can't come after, their creditors can't come after you. And after the owner's death, all you have to do is file give a copy to the clerk and recorder, a copy of the recorded TOD, a death certificate, and then at that time is when you file this, what is called a realty transfer certificate, and it's form 488. And all of this information is in the Mont Guide that we have available from Extension. And basically what it does is just identifies who the owners are. So you want to use your full name, not your nickname, a legal description of the party or the property. And this legal description is not the one that's used on the tax form that you get. Use the one with the original deed. Then you can name a primary beneficiary and then an alternate and then notarize the form. Then you give it to the clerk of the clerk and recorder, and you're set. Now, we also need to think about where do you file it? Well, it's in the county where the property is located. So if you're one of those barons that have property in Flathead County, and you also have property in Richland County, then you are going to have to file 2 beneficiary deeds, not just one, but with the clerk and recorder in each of those counties. And of course, we need to think about who do we want to be our designated beneficiaries. Could be a spouse, could be your children, friends, other relatives, a corporation. And Kevin, how about if a person is single and they don't have any heirs, how could you use a TOD that way?
Sure, great question. Again, we come to nonprofits. You can use a TOD with 2 Ds to deed your property to nonprofits. In this case, maybe you've got an interest in Museum of the Rockies and you want to leave them that property. So you'll want to check with the nonprofit to see how they'll treat the property. Can they even accept real property? Because especially when we're talking about real property, what is it? Where is it located? Will they sell it upon receipt or as quickly as possible, or will they hold it potentially and put it into their asset pool? So again, it's important and recommended that you talk to the charity about that and how they will use that. So again, our Thoughtful Thursday tip from our Explorers Gentian is to explore if a transfer on death deed would benefit you or be an appropriate tool in your estate planning situation. And Marcia, so what else should we know about Todd's with 2Ds?
Well, there's always more that I can share with people, and I'm going to use this real pretty foxglove to give you more about Todd's. Oh, and certainly we have learned about gloves and what have you, but foxes. Yes, you're probably wondering how this got in here. Well, I was trying out my camera and I saw these cute little foxes in the Beartooth Mountains. So moving along, I want you to outfox the law. What if a designated beneficiary for your transfer on death deed dies before you do? Well, be foxy. Specify a successor. And Mark Fox has done this. He filed and recorded his Todd. And he's thinking, well, I want Eric to be my designated beneficiary. But if Evan dies before I do, I want it to go to my grandson, Luke. So you can have one, or you can have two successors, or three. Just think about the challenge that might be there, though. If you're going to leave, say, a home in Bozeman to three of your kids, if they didn't get along as kids, chances are they're not going to get along as adults. Now, I know that sounds negative, but I could tell you stories. So you could also then use a nonprofit as a successor. And I, of course, just wanted to use an example that I was familiar with. Okay, so the Thoughtful Thursday tip is outfox the law by naming a nonprofit as a successor beneficiary. Think that through. Now here we have a blue flax. You ever tried to photograph one of these dudes? They're about this tall, and you may think the wind is not blowing, but it always is, and it's going shutter, shutter, shutter. And so I was delighted when I got this one. So that's a clue to introduce Gary Blue and his two blue children, Linda and Matt Blue. So what we've got here is Gary Blue files a transfer on death deed, naming his daughter Linda Blue as the designated beneficiary. Okay, Emily, I'm going to have you step in here, put you on a difficult spot. What's going to happen with this, with Gary writing a will, and now he's going to leave it to his son?
Yeah, so let's take a look at that. We've got a poll question here. So who gets the property when Gary Blue passes away? Is it Linda, who's the designated beneficiary, or is it Matt, who was named in the will after the transfer on death deed was filed? So Marcia, I think maybe while we're waiting for some of these poll answers to come in, we have a couple of questions that came up in the chat that might be good to answer right now because they're
okay. That would be great. Thank you.
So somebody asked, are PODs and TODs available in other states, or is that something that just applies to Montana law?
No. There are many other states that have TODs and PODs. They probably refer to them as that. But like the transfer on death deed, some of them refer to it as a beneficiary deed. And so you would just need to check with that particular state, contact the extension office for example, if you own land in North Dakota, North Dakota has the Uniform Probate Code, and it's very similar to Montana, but I don't know if they have a transfer on death deed. So check it out with the state that you own some property in.
Okay. And then another question that came up, which I think is interesting, just had a change in this. What's considered real property? I mean, I know real property is still the same, but now TODDs can be applied to more than just real property, right?
Okay, what are you referring to, Emily?
Do we have something for vehicles now?
Oh,
Someone is asking
yes,
about
yes,
that.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
I'm excited. And I have a slide for this at the very end, but yes, the legislature just passed a law that is going to allow you to transfer your vehicle and any vessel. And I found the definition of vessel is like boats and other things, but it'll include anything like that that has a tag or some sort of ownership thing. And we're going to be able to do this. Now, what the legislature did was hand it over to the Motor Vehicle Division to come up with the form. So they're working on that. There is not a date that we know for sure that it will be available, but my expectation would be by October the 1st, because that's when laws typically go into effect. And it could be that they would have it available sooner. So that means, yay, Marcia and others get to redo the mock guide that we've got on how to do that previously. And it was so complicated. This is going to make it so much easier that we can transfer our vehicles without probate as well. Yay!
Great. Okay, so we have our poll results in now, and it looks like the good majority of folks answered that Linda was going to be receiving that property when Gary passes away, and we had a few people answer Matt. So let's see what the correct answer is here. Yes, so those of you who answered Linda are correct, and this is because she is the designated beneficiary. And just like we talked about with pods and TODs, transfer on death deeds are contractual, which means they cannot be undone by a will.
And
So,
Emily, I think this also means people were listening when we were talking about those
yes.
others. So we compliment you because this was really a test question. And if the majority of you had missed it, we would know we really need to improve our teaching skills. So thank you for listening.
Yes. So in this case, right, Matt is singing the blues because he's getting nothing, and maybe that's not what his dad intended. Maybe he wanted them to each get something, or maybe he really did want Matt to get the property. So keep that in mind. Something else that Gary Blue could have done if he didn't want to cause any ruffled feathers between his kids is he could have left the property to a nonprofit like the Alzheimer's Association, and again, like Marcia said, specified if he wanted it to go to a specific thing or a specific place like the Montana chapter. So now Matt and Linda are both singing the blues, but maybe Gary feels okay about that because he didn't treat one of them differently than the other.
Yeah, and that's something I hear a lot. I did a program yesterday and I was asking people about equal. And parents are so concerned about equal, but we're starting to see a trend towards equitable. And of course, equitable is in the eyes of the beholder of how fair would that be.
So for our Thoughtful Thursday tip from a Blue Flax, just remember that like any other contract, you can't undo a transfer on death deed with a will, even if the will was written later than you filed the transfer on death deed. So
Or
time
even earlier, it just,
Right.
the will isn't, and people need to know that. They
Yeah.
think, you know, well, I'm sorry, here I am jumping in about
No.
joint tenancies. You know, people are writing wills thinking they can will away joint tenancy property. And they can't because it's a contract, and that's a whole nother program. But just keep in mind about the will business. Now, Emily, this one happens to be a, let's see, oh yeah, evening primrose. And these are very beautiful, but the catch is they only last a day. So if you look on the right, you can see that this other one croaked because he is maybe blooming yesterday with that. So tell us about the Primrose family who ended up filing more than one deed.
Yeah, so Evan Primrose, let's say he files a transfer on death deed in 2020 and he designates Susan Primrose as his beneficiary. And then in 2022, Evan files another transfer on death deed, but this time he designates Lucy Primrose as the beneficiary.
And I know what you're going to do. You're going to have a question, right?
Yes, yeah, we want to see if you've been paying attention. So, which deed is going to be effective on the same property? Is it the first one that was filed in 2020 that designated Susan as the recipient? Or is it going to be the deed or the transfer on death deed that was filed in 2022 and would give Lucy Primrose that property? What do we think that'll be?
And don't forget to hit submit. I mean, it's hiding down there at the bottom of the page. I think we should come up with, I guess, longer answers, Emily, so we fill the box.
So a question that's just come up recently, which is good to talk about right now, are these transfers revocable?
Oh, sure. You decide to change your mind about your transfer on death deed, you just file another TOD deed.
What if,
Same way with your POD. You want to change it? It's fine. You would just go in and get a new form and put different names on there. And that's logical because through time, our desires on who we're going to leave stuff to does change. And you know, people pass away, so we want to update things, just like we want to update the will.
so let's say you wanted to, for some reason, go a different route than a TODD, but you had already filed one. Can you just revoke the old one and not file a new one?
Exactly. You just say, I hereby revoke, and there's a form that we've got with the website on a revocation. They also put that in the law, so that's another reason we can make that one available.
Okay. So we have our answers in, and it looks like most people said that the more recent transfer on death deed is the one that's valid, and you would be correct about that.
Yeah, but I'm surprised the number, and we really didn't talk about this, but yeah, we've got Oh Lucy, the latest one. Wow.
Yeah. And again, like we were just talking about, like Marcia had answered that question, if more than one transfer on death deed is filed for the same property, the most recent one is the one that's considered valid. And we would call that the controlling document. It supersedes any of the document of the TODDs on the same property that came before.
And this reminds me to just suggest, you know, if you've got a family member that is starting to demonstrate, let's just call them memory issues, then it may be important to help them with some of their financial affairs and have a way to track so that dad or mom would know, oh, I've already done a deed. And maybe they do want to do another one for another child, but it could have been they just forgot they did one. It's like me, I just registered for the second time for a conference, and that was rather embarrassing. But sometimes that kind of thing goes on.
So our Thursday tip from our evening Primrose and the Primrose family is to make sure that you keep track of your transfer on death deed filings, but also any other documents or decisions you've made about estate planning. So next we have our Richardson's geranium. This is a really neat picture with all the dewdrops on it.
Yes, and actually, this was after a rain, Emily, and I was so delighted that I got it like this. And that's the thing about flowers, they have more hairs if you look really close. And I got that with just an itty bitty camera like this. And I turned it into an organization, and I was thrilled that they decided to use it for a card. Now, of course, I wish I got some money, but they just said, thank you, we appreciate it. Okay, what about Richardson's geranium?
We have Granny Richardson. That's what I think of when I see this geranium.
Mm-hmm.
So then, Kevin, tell us how Granny Richardson might be able to use a transfer on death deed.
Yeah, so Granny Richardson is passionate about Montana PBS. So she wants to use a TODD to support her favorite charity, Montana PBS. So she has a condo in Billings. She has no heirs that are interested in the condo. And Marcia laughed when I said this. She's like, "Oh, I'm sure there's heirs." Well, maybe, like we've talked about, maybe Granny has other plans for her other heirs, and she wants her condo to go to support Montana PBS instead. So, what is she going to do? She's going to work with Montana PBS on a gift designation for, specifically in this case, program development and production. So she's going to create, again, a gift agreement. Back to what I said earlier, is working with Montana PBS. Montana PBS is aware of the deed. And that gift agreement spells out how Montana PBS will deal with the property when they get it, sell it, use those funds in Granny's preferred wish in her support of Montana PBS. So Granny will go to the clerk and recorder in Yellowstone County, naming Montana PBS as a designated beneficiary. She'll also send a copy, we hope, of that deed to Montana PBS so they have that for their records. And then Montana PBS is going to recognize Granny for her generous support, and they're going to recognize her through the Legacy Society that they have. They're going to continue to thank her and engage her in ongoing programs and projects that they have. Again, as I've said earlier, we, the charities, we like to know, not that we want to hound Granny throughout the rest of her life, but really so that we can say thank you and really understand what she wants to do with her generous support in the future through the TODD. So our tip from Granny Richardson's geranium is, could Todd's with 2 Ds be helpful for you with your favorite charity or charities and something you might be passionate about? And Marcia, do you have more information for us about avoiding probate that you'd like to share?
Well, I just want to reemphasize that we do have a transfer on deeds Mont Guide. The Mont Guide is a fancy term that we use for the fact sheets that we have. And these are all available on the web or from your county extension office. So if you're considering a transfer on death deed, there's really more to think about than what we've covered today. As a matter of fact, when the beneficiary deed law was first passed, I was so excited. I thought, okay, I'll get this done in a month. We'll get it out. And then I realized, ooh, there's some more included. So I went to my who turned out to be my co-author, Kristen, and she said, Marcia, there's a lot more in this. And I said, well, would you help me write the publication? And she said, Marcia, I testified against the bill. And I go, well, why did you do that? Well, the reason was there were a lot more things to include. And so with her assistance, I was able to include those in the Mont Guide itself. So that's really one you'll want to read closely because we talk about the difference between joint tenancy and tenancy in common. You see, when you do a TOD and you're going to leave it to more than one person, you need to indicate, is it a joint tenancy or a tenancy in common? Okay. Then we also have another Mont Guide on non-probate transfers. So these are your pods, your TODs, and we have examples in there of life insurance and different ways that you can word some of the kinds of things with those. And then this was my clue, my reminder to tell you about the House Bill 141 that did pass and that we're going to have a transfer on deed form for vehicles and vessels in Montana. So that is great to have that coming down the line. So of course, I'll be working on a Mont Guide for that in working with the motor vehicle department so that we can get that information out to individuals that are interested in it. Well, my observation from the Lady Slipper is that Kevin and Emily, as usual, time has really slipped away. And I'm hoping that we steered our participants to an awareness of how they could use PODs and TODs to avoid the cost of probate. Why pay those extra fees when you want to leave more of your hard-earned dollars for your heirs? And I hope we did steer you to an awareness of how a transfer on death deed on real property. And you see, real property is land and anything that's attached to the land. So if you have trees on your land and they're standing there, they're considered as real property. Once they're cut down, then they're considered as personal property. So you want to make sure that you do your planning to take care of whatever assets it is that you have. And if you find that you don't have a memory like this elephant's head, and I don't know how many of you have seen an elephant head, but look, you could just see where they get the name. Look at the little ears and little trunk that's there. Those are so cute. We have 47 different mock guides on estate planning. And you're probably saying, oh my gosh. Well, that just gives you an idea of how much we need to think about before we do our estate planning. So we have one on getting started. We've got one on, the TODs, the PODs, TODs, all those kinds of things, as well as probate, personal representative, etc. And don't forget, yes, these are forget-me-nots. These fact sheets are also available at our county extension offices. And then the ones that are appropriate for each of our Thoughtful Thursdays is at the website where you registered. So if you've forgotten that, just do Thoughtful Thursdays, Montana. And I did that this morning just to make sure. And sure enough, our website came up for our program. And we do appreciate your participation in our webinars. And we look forward to seeing you on April the 22nd, which will be next Thursday. But I want to make sure that we go ahead and, what's the topic? I think it's going to be an interesting one. It's using your individual retirement account as an estate or legacy planning tool. And those of you that have inherited one of these, maybe you don't have one. Well, if you've inherited one, you now have one. But I think you would find this program very, very useful. So now, Emily, we have any additional questions there? And believe it or not, I remembered to stop sharing. Yay. Okay, Emily, any questions?
Yes, we actually have quite a few that came in. So, one question that someone asked regarding mutual funds, how is a TOD different than a beneficiary?
If you have a mutual fund and you have already designated a beneficiary, you're fine. What happened is we had several companies from out of state that were telling Montanans that they could not do a beneficiary designation. Well, come on, that's a law in our, so what Montana did was pass a law to say if they're not doing a beneficiary designation, they definitely have to do a transfer on death designation. So most all of the companies now that you're dealing with, if you're a Montana resident, they're going to allow you to do that beneficiary designation. So it's the same, it's just a different kind of word, depending on how old the form is that you filled out. So no difference there. Emily, I couldn't hear you.
Yep, I was muted. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Gotta love webinars. So someone else was asking, are PODs, TODs, and TODDs needed if I have a revocable trust that clearly names family members to distribute cash, stocks, and property assets?
Okay, now if you have a trust agreement, what is going to happen is that your trust controls those items. But what you need to know is a trust controls what is in the name of the trust. So if your checking, savings, your house, and everything is in the name of the trust, then the trust determines where it goes. And then your trustee is the one that's going to handle all that work because you've named a trustee in your trust. So you typically would not have both of those. I think most attorneys would say if you're going to go to the expense of having a trust, what you want to do is put everything in there because that quotes avoids probate. My take on that is, well, you're changing all the names on everything anyway. You're really doing a probate ahead of time because you're putting it over here into the name of the trust. But the reality is, once it's there, the trustee then has to take it out of the name of the trust and put it into the name of the people that are going to inherit it. Or you may have a trust that's going to go on for a period of time where only the income is going to go out to the beneficiaries. So take a look at what your trust agreement says, and then you can take it from there. Did that answer it, Emily, you think?
Yeah, I mean, if I think it did. If it didn't answer that question, and you need more clarification, please go ahead and type that into the chat. Okay, so another question we'll move on to until we get some clarification. Someone asked if you could use the terms by right of representation in a TODD. I think that came from the slide where you talked about a POD having that language or being connected to that language.
Yeah, what you need to do is look at what it is that you're signing and the wording that's used there, because typically they will let you do one or two, and then if you look at the small print, then it'll say it'll go into the estate. And do they say in and distributed by right of representation or what? So that's where we want to look and see what the form says. And that'll be the clue right there.
Okay. And then the other thing, I think that this was probably answered because they said they got their question answered, but just to clarify, I think there was a little bit of confusion from some people. TODs, PODs are not part of your will. That's a separate contract. You're never going to have payable on death written into your will. It's going to be a separate form. So just to clarify the couple of comments I saw.
Exactly. Very good, Emily. Yep.
Let's see. Another question that came up. If there is a father who has 6 kids and labels one child as the beneficiary on a POD, TOD, or TOD, will the rest of the children be notified at the death of the father that the one child is the beneficiary? Since those items don't go through probate, are those other children going to find out that their sibling received all of that?
They'll find out one way or another. There will be somebody that won't be able to resist telling them about that. I just guarantee you, whether it's a small community or what, it's so if that's what you want to do, it's your property, do it the way you want, and let's just put it out there. You know, when I die, I thought you were going to ask, well, I've made one of the 6, and what that one is supposed to do is distribute it to the rest of the kids. And technically, they would not have to do that because with the POD to that child, it's that child's, and they could share or not share. But just think, are you setting that child up for family disagreements, assuring that they'll never get together for Thanksgiving or Christmas or something like that? So again, your property, your decision.
One other just quick helpful thought that I've learned through kind of like Marcia, you see some horror stories, but is as simple as writing a letter to each one of your children or heirs, just explaining why you did what you did, right? Why do you gave them that property to the one heir and not to the other 5? And that helps the fighting potential that could arise. Just then they're not questioning your motives, and you may have very good reason for that. So.
Yeah, and that's a real good point, Kevin, because I had an example of there were 3 kids, and the mom left everything to the daughter. And people would say, well, why was that? Well, she put an explanation in the will, and it's because the doctor has the daughter has provided care that has kept her out of the nursing home. And the two brothers, they weren't upset at all. They thought that's the way it should be because they were living out of state and the daughter was here caring for mom. And, you know, it did keep her out of the nursing home. And that was certainly an equitable solution to the situation. Okay, any other questions?
I'm not seeing any related to pods and Tods. I do have a couple people asking if the slides are going to be available after the presentation, and the answer is yes. Normally I would put a link in the chat for where you can find those recordings, but because this is the first session, we don't have the link to that yet because this is our first recording. But yes, if you go to the Thoughtful Thursdays website, which I will put the link to that in the chat right now. On the left-hand side, there's a menu of different options that you can click on, and there should be a past webinar recordings link right there that you can look at as well.
Yeah, I'm not even sure it's there yet, but there will be,
Yeah.
and there's a schedule. I think it says schedule and past recordings there.
Yeah, so I
for
think
that.
that'll be updated once we get this webinar recording posted, and that usually happens within 3 or 4 days. We sort of have to wait for it to be all prepared and ready to upload.
Yeah, and one of the other things I didn't realize that's happening with some is they're making them accessible. So there's words on the right-hand side. So I bet if I looked at that, I'd go, oh, surely I don't go every time, or lots of ands and what have you.
Yes, I think that's all the questions that we have today. It was some really good questions. I'll give folks a couple of minutes to put in anything else. And just a reminder, like Marcia said, we'll be doing these every week through the middle of May. If you already registered for these webinars, you should get a reminder email every week. There's no need to register again. And I'm not seeing any other questions come up, Marcia and Kevin. So
Okay, well, again, on behalf of Kevin and Emily and Carrie, we thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next week. And if you have any suggestions or questions about individual retirement accounts, send them to us via email. My email is it's at the website, so you can find that information. So Emily, one more.
One more. Yep, something came in just now. Someone's asking, so is there no need for a revocable living trust if you have all these options like POD, TOD, transfer on death deeds?
If you've gone through the expense of establishing a revocable living trust, the reason you did that is because Montana didn't have these tools. But simply because those tools are available is no reason to eliminate your revocable living trust. I would suggest that you visit with your attorney about that and see what the recommendation would be. But I would hope that the trust was developed and takes care of your not having to have these assets go through probate. Because you see, if you have a will, the will, it goes through probate and it becomes a matter of public record. Okay, so that means any Tom, Dick, and Harry could go in and look at your will. With the trust, it doesn't, And so with the PODs, the only one is the clerk and recorder, and that public information is there anyway. So think about it. One lady told me she'd spent $3,200 for a trust. And, you don't want to just throw all that money down the tube if it meets your needs. Okay.
Okay, so this person I think is asking a clarification question. I think they don't already have one, but they were sort of trying to consider what the best option would be.
Okay.
So
Okay.
if they don't already have one, but they were considering it, would PODs, TODs substitute for a revocable living trust?
Yeah, I gotta walk a fine line here. All of us do, to make sure that we're not getting out legal advice. What we're supposed to do is provide education. So in providing education, I would say look very closely at what your objectives are. Okay. And then think about legal advice. It's very good. You know, I've been working for this for a long time. And when it came time to do my will and my planning, I thought, you know, about the time you think you know it all is when you make a mistake. So I went to the attorney thinking I knew it all anyway. And the attorney brought up some things that I had not considered. So I think you get a good attorney, they are worth what you pay them. But I also want to know how much they charge per hour. I have my list of questions and I'm going to write down things. And if they don't have our estate planning mock guides or know about them, I know they don't do very much estate planning, because we have the business, estates, tax, trust, and real property section reviewing our mock guides to make sure they're right. And when I see one of those attorneys, I just go, nope, that's not the person I want. Oh, and that's another mock guide, forgot to mention. In the next couple of months, I've got a mock guide coming out on selecting an estate planning attorney. I get asked that question so often that I decided I'm going to bite the bullet there and get that one done and get it through the attorneys. And that was fun. So you'll enjoy reading that one, I think. So again, thank you very much for your participation today. We look forward to seeing you next week. In the meantime, keep healthy. Okay. Bye.